Hey everyone! We are working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content and it is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button right now as we proceed. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. just opened up about the most devastating moment of his career, and what he revealed is going to hit you right in the heart. We're talking about raw emotion, unfiltered honesty, and a glimpse behind the curtain of what it's really like to come within inches of a World Series championship only to have it ripped away in the most heartbreaking fashion imaginable. Spring training is supposed to be about fresh starts and new beginnings, but Vlad just took us all back to that gut-wrenching Game 7 loss, and his confession about what happened in that locker room afterward is something every Blue Jays fan needs to hear. This isn't your typical polished corporate athlete speak. This is real, this is vulnerable, and this is exactly why Vlad Guerrero Jr. is the heartbeat of this franchise. But before we dive into what Vlad said and what it means for this season, we need to talk about some other major developments that are reshaping the American League East and impacting how the Blue Jays are approaching 2026. Let's start with the gut punch that came right after all the injury news about Shane Bieber and Anthony Santander. Chris Bassitt, the veteran right-hander who was such a crucial part of the Blue Jays' rotation and clubhouse last season, just signed with the Baltimore Orioles. And not just signed but got absolutely paid. We're talking about an $18 million deal for one season. That's significant money for a pitcher entering his mid-30s, and it tells you everything you need to know about how valuable Bassitt's consistency and leadership are in today's market. For Blue Jays fans, this one stings for multiple reasons. First, you're losing a guy who threw nearly 170 innings with a 3.96 ERA last season. That's exactly the kind of reliable, durable starting pitching that championship contenders need. Second, and this is arguably worse, he's going to a division rival. The Baltimore Orioles just added a proven veteran arm to a rotation that desperately needed exactly what Bassitt provides. Now, let's be real about this for a second. Could the Blue Jays have matched that $18 million offer? Absolutely. They have the financial resources to make it happen if they really wanted to. But here's the thing. With the rotation depth they thought they had before Shane Bieber's injury issues surfaced, spending $18 million on Bassitt would have been trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. It would have been an expensive insurance policy that maybe wasn't necessary at the time the decision was being made. And let's not forget, the Blue Jays were heavily involved in the Framber Valdez sweepstakes. They were pursuing bigger fish, trying to land a frontline starter rather than bringing back a solid middle-of-the-rotation guy at premium money. But now, with Bieber's status uncertain and the rotation suddenly looking thinner than expected, you can understand why some fans are frustrated that Bassitt got away. Hindsight is always 20/20, right? The good news is this explains why the Blue Jays continue to be linked to Max Scherzer. They still need veteran pitching depth, and Scherzer represents exactly the kind of low-risk, high-reward option that makes sense given the current circumstances. Would I have preferred they just brought back Bassitt? Maybe. But I also understand the financial calculation that went into letting him walk, even if it hurts to see him in an Orioles uniform. And let's talk about what this means for the American League East arms race because the division just got even more competitive. The Orioles have been consistently criticized for not having enough quality starting pitching despite their incredible position player depth. They just addressed that weakness by adding Chris Bassitt to a rotation that now includes Shane Baz, Zach Eflin, Kyle Bradish, Trevor Rogers, Dean Kramer, and Bassitt. That's actually a pretty solid group, especially if everyone stays healthy. It's not the most intimidating rotation in baseball, but it's good enough to support the elite offense Baltimore can deploy on any given night. For the Blue Jays, this creates additional pressure to make sure their own rotation depth holds up over the course of a 162-game season. You're competing against the Yankees with Garrett Cole, the Orioles with their newly improved rotation, and the Rays who always seem to find a way to develop pitching out of nowhere. The margin for error in this division is razor thin, and losing Bassitt to a direct competitor makes that margin even thinner. Speaking of former Blue Jays finding new homes, we need to talk about a couple of relievers who are heading to the Minnesota Twins. Julian Merryweather and Liam Hendriks, both of whom spent time in Toronto, just signed deals to join the Twins' bullpen. Now, these aren't going to be the signings that change the course of anyone's season, but they're interesting from a nostalgia and rooting interest perspective. Liam Hendriks in particular is one of those guys who Blue Jays fans still have fond memories of because he really found himself as a major league pitcher during his time in Toronto. He went on to have an incredible career, becoming one of the best closers in baseball for several years with the Oakland Athletics and Chicago White Sox. But recently, Hendriks has been battling back from serious health issues. He was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a form of cancer, and had to step away from baseball to undergo treatment. The fact that he's healthy enough to sign a contract and compete for a roster spot is genuinely inspiring. Last season was rough for him, posting a 6.06 ERA in almost 30 appearances, but you have to give him credit for even being on a major league mound considering what he's been through. The Twins are taking a flyer on him, hoping that he can rediscover some of that closer magic, and honestly, I'm rooting for him. He's a stand-up guy who's overcome incredible adversity, and it would be a great story if he can contribute to a winning team again. Julian Merryweather is in a similar boat, signing a minor league deal with the Twins and trying to make the roster out of spring training. He had a really rough season last year with a 5.87 ERA in about the same number of innings as Hendriks. But Merryweather has shown flashes of being a legitimate power arm when healthy. The problem is staying healthy has been his biggest challenge throughout his career. If the Twins can keep him on the field, he's got the stuff to be a useful bullpen piece. Both of these guys are wait-and-see spring training invites, but they're familiar names that Blue Jays fans will recognize, and it'll be interesting to see if either of them can make an impact in Minnesota. But let's get to the main event here, because what Vladimir Guerrero Jr. said about Game 7 is absolutely the headline story from spring training so far. Vlad was asked by reporters about how it felt in the locker room immediately after that devastating loss, and he didn't hold back. He didn't give some sanitized corporate response about learning experiences and growth opportunities. He looked at the camera and said, "I cried like a baby. Everybody did. It was heartbreaking." Let that sink in for a second. The face of the franchise, one of the best hitters in baseball, a guy who's supposed to be the stoic superstar, admitting publicly that he broke down and cried after coming so close to a championship. That's vulnerability. That's honesty. That's the kind of emotional rawness that makes you realize these guys aren't robots. They're human beings who invest everything they have into achieving their dreams, and when those dreams get crushed in the most painful way possible, it hurts just as much for them as it does for the fans watching. And Vlad didn't stop there. He talked about how everyone in that clubhouse was crying together. The veterans, the young guys, the coaches, everyone. It was a collective moment of grief and heartbreak that bonded that group in a way that only shared suffering can. He mentioned how the families showed up after the game to lift them up, to tell them how proud they were, to remind them that they had accomplished something incredible even if it didn't end the way they wanted. That's what family does. That's what real support looks like in the darkest moments. What really stood out to me about Vlad's comments was how similar they were to what we heard from other players like Ernie Clement who've opened up about that Game 7 loss. But hearing it from Vlad, the main man, the guy who carries this team offensively and represents the franchise globally, it hits different. It makes it feel more significant. It validates the emotions that every single Blue Jays fan felt watching that game and wondering how they were supposed to process what just happened. Because if you were watching that game, you know exactly what Vlad is talking about. The baseball gods intervened about 3 or 4 times to make sure the Blue Jays didn't win that championship. Balls that should have been hits found gloves. Calls that could have gone Toronto's way went the other way. Moments that seemed destined to be turning points fizzled out into nothing. It was excruciating to watch as a fan, and you can only imagine how much worse it was to actually be on the field experiencing it in real time. But here's what makes Vlad's comments so powerful and so important for this upcoming season. He's not trying to hide from that pain. He's not pretending it didn't happen or that it doesn't still hurt. He's acknowledging it, owning it, and using it as fuel for this year. He specifically said that if he was in that locker room after all that heartbreak, it would make him that much more hungry to come back with most of that same group of people and really go to war together. That's the mentality of a champion. That's the mindset of someone who's determined to turn devastation into motivation. And that's exactly what Blue Jays fans should want to hear heading into this season. You don't want your star player to shrug off a Game 7 loss and act like it was no big deal. You want him to be hurt by it. You want him to let it fuel his preparation and his intensity. You want him to come into spring training with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. That's what Vlad is bringing, and if that mentality spreads throughout the entire clubhouse, the Blue Jays could be absolutely dangerous this year. Think about what this team went through together. They battled through injuries all season long. They fought their way into the playoffs. They won series they weren't supposed to win. They made it all the way to Game 7 of the World Series against one of the best teams in baseball. And they came within a few breaks of winning the whole thing. That experience, that shared journey, that collective heartbreak, it doesn't just disappear. It becomes part of the team's identity. It becomes the foundation for what comes next. Now, most of that core group is still together. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is back. Bassitt is back when healthy. The pitching staff has some question marks with injuries, but the talent is there. The hunger is definitely there. The memory of crying in that locker room after Game 7 is fresh in everyone's mind. That's either going to destroy a team and make them fold under pressure, or it's going to forge them into something even stronger. Based on what Vlad just said, it sounds like the Blue Jays are choosing the second option. This is why spring training matters so much this year. This isn't just about getting ready for another season. This is about a team with unfinished business. This is about players who experience the highest of highs and the lowest of lows all in the same season, and they're coming back determined to finish what they started. The emotional weight of that Game 7 loss could have broken this group. Instead, it seems to be binding them together even tighter. Vlad's honesty about crying like a baby isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of how much this means to him. It's proof that he cares deeply about winning a championship for this city and this fan base. And when you have your best player that invested, that emotionally committed, that hungry to erase a painful memory with championship glory, that's when special things can happen. The Blue Jays are dealing with injuries. They're navigating roster questions. They're competing in the toughest division in baseball. But they also have something that can't be quantified on a stat sheet. They have motivation. They have shared purpose. They have a leader in Vladimir Guerrero Jr. who's not afraid to be vulnerable and honest about how much that Game 7 loss hurt. And that honesty, that raw emotion, that determination to make sure it doesn't happen again, that could be the difference maker this season. So here's what I need from you right now. Smash that like button if Vlad's honesty about Game 7 made you even more excited for this season. Drop a comment below telling me if you think this team can finish what they started and bring a championship to Toronto. And absolutely hit that subscribe button because spring training is just getting started, and we're going to be covering every emotional moment, every roster decision, every step of this journey as the Blue Jays try to turn heartbreak into triumph. This is going to be one incredible season, and you're not going to want to miss a single moment. Let's go Blue Jays!